What happens to a woman's body after a long period without intimacy? This is not a provocative question. It's a biological one. Because intimacy is not just an act, it is information. It tells the body how safe it is to open, relax, bond, and receive. When that information disappears for months or years, the body does not break. It adjusts. Quietly, intelligently, without asking permission. This video is not about judgment, fear, or exaggeration. It is about understanding how the female body adapts when connection is absent, physically, hormonally, and emotionally. Intimacy as a biological regulator, not a luxury. Intimacy is often misunderstood as something optional, something that enhances life but is not essential to it. Yet, from a biological and psychological standpoint, intimacy functions more like a regulatory system than a reward. For the female body in particular, intimacy provides constant feedback to the nervous system about safety, belonging, and emotional stability. When intimacy is present, the body receives clear signals that it is allowed to relax, soften, and open. Hormonal systems respond accordingly, supporting balanced estrogen activity, healthy oxytocin release, and efficient stress recovery. Emotional expression flows more naturally because the body does not feel the need to remain guarded. Intimacy, in this sense, acts as a stabilizing input, similar to sleep or nutrition, shaping how the body allocates energy between self-protection and connection. When intimacy disappears for a long period of time, the body does not interpret this as a moral failure or a personal rejection. It interprets it as an environmental change. And like all intelligent systems, it adapts. The absence of consistent emotional or physical closeness causes the nervous system to gradually shift its priorities away from bonding and toward self-regulation. Instead of relying on relational cues to determine safety, the body begins to depend more heavily on internal control mechanisms. Emotional expression becomes more contained, not because feelings disappear, but because expressing them no longer serves an immediate biological function. The body learns to conserve the energy that would normally be invested in connection, intimacy, and responsiveness, and redirects that energy toward independence, vigilance, and emotional efficiency. This is why many women in long periods without intimacy do not appear distressed on the surface. They may even seem stronger, more focused, and more self-directed. What is happening internally is not emotional shutdown, but emotional reorganization. Bonding chemistry such as oxytocin becomes less dominant, not because the body no longer values connection, but because it no longer expects it. Over time, the baseline state shifts from relational openness to self-sufficiency. Stress is processed cognitively rather than relationally, comfort is generated internally rather than through touch or closeness, and emotional needs are managed privately rather than shared. This adaptation protects the nervous system from repeated disappointment or unmet expectation. It prevents the body from constantly preparing for closeness that does not arrive. Importantly, this shift is not permanent damage, nor is it a loss of femininity, desire, or emotional depth. It is a strategic adjustment, similar to how the body lowers metabolic demands during scarcity. The female body is not designed to remain open in an environment that does not consistently provide safety or connection, so it becomes selective, economical, and efficient. Understanding intimacy as a biological regulator rather than a luxury helps explain why long periods without it change how a woman feels, responds, and relates to the world. Not in dramatic or visible ways, but in subtle patterns of self-containment, emotional independence, and reduced reliance on external validation. Hormonal and nervous system adaptation. When a woman experiences a long period without intimacy, her body undergoes profound, though often subtle, hormonal and nervous system adaptations that are designed not to punish her, but to help her survive emotionally and biologically. Hormones like oxytocin, commonly called the bonding hormone, play a critical role in how women connect with others and experience emotional closeness. During regular intimacy, oxytocin is released not just during sexual activity, but during touch, eye contact, emotional connection, and nurturing interactions, creating feelings of trust, warmth, and safety. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for reward, motivation, and pleasure, is also stimulated by these same interactions, reinforcing the desire to seek connection and closeness. When these experiences are consistently absent, the body begins to recalibrate its hormonal baseline. Oxytocin levels may decrease, leading to a subtle reduction in the instinctual drive for closeness and a quieter, more self-contained emotional state. Dopamine activity shifts from being relationally motivated to goal-directed, meaning that the brain now rewards achievement, self-sufficiency, and personal growth more than social or sexual connection. These shifts are not indications of emotional damage or repression. Rather, they are adaptive mechanisms that allow the body to redirect energy away from unmet needs towards survival, productivity, and internal regulation. Alongside hormonal changes, the nervous system also adapts in response to prolonged absence of intimacy. The autonomic nervous system, which regulates stress responses and emotional arousal, often shifts toward a low-level sympathetic dominance, a subtle form of heightened alertness designed to protect against potential social or emotional threats. This does not manifest as anxiety in most cases, but rather as a quiet hypervigilance, a nervous system state in which the body remains prepared for connection only under conditions that feel safe and predictable. The result is a woman who may appear calm, composed, or independent, but who internally is more selective, cautious, and emotionally guarded than she would be in an environment with consistent intimacy. Over time, this hormonal and nervous system adaptation affects emotional expression, decision-making, and relational behavior. She may become less likely to open up spontaneously, less sensitive to subtle romantic cues, or slower to trust others with vulnerability. This is the body's way of preventing wasted emotional energy in situations where emotional investment is uncertain or unsafe. It is also why women who have experienced long stretches without intimacy often develop stronger personal boundaries and a greater sense of self-reliance. These adaptations are not permanent, but they do create patterns that influence behavior, attraction, and responsiveness, until new relational experiences provide evidence that it is safe to relax and re-engage. Importantly, these changes are not synonymous with the loss of desire. The female body maintains its capacity for connection, attachment, and sexual responsiveness, but the threshold for activation becomes higher because the nervous system has learned to prioritize caution and safety. In practical terms, this means that a woman's openness to intimacy may seem muted, delayed, or calculated, but it is always adaptive and protective rather than reactive or punitive. Understanding these hormonal and nervous system adjustments provides insight into the deep, invisible ways a woman's body manages prolonged absence of intimacy. It explains why she may become self-reliant, emotionally reserved, or selective in her relationships, while simultaneously maintaining the potential for profound connection and desire once conditions feel safe, predictable, and emotionally secure. These adaptations reflect intelligence and resilience rather than deficiency, revealing a body and mind that are always attuned to survival, safety, and eventual reconnection. What happens to desire? It does not disappear. One of the most common misconceptions about women who go long periods without intimacy is that their sexual desire disappears entirely. But the truth is far more nuanced and fascinating. Desire does not vanish. It becomes dormant, strategic, and selective. Sexual and emotional desire in women is deeply intertwined with emotional safety, trust, and nervous system regulation, meaning that in the absence of intimacy, the body is not rejecting connection. It is conserving energy and protecting itself from vulnerability that feels unsafe or unrewarding. When intimacy is lacking for months or years, the physiological systems that drive sexual responsiveness, including blood flow, hormone surges, and nervous system activation, do not shut down permanently. Instead, their baseline activity subtly decreases, requiring a higher threshold of emotional safety to trigger arousal. This manifests in ways that are often misunderstood. Spontaneous erotic thoughts may become less frequent, physical responsiveness to casual attention may decrease, and the motivation to initiate sexual contact may slow. Importantly, these changes are adaptive, not pathological. The body is essentially saying, "I am capable of desire, but I will not expend energy on connection that is inconsistent or unsafe. Over time, this recalibration affects the way desire is expressed. Women may become more attuned to meaningful emotional cues rather than superficial stimuli, more selective about partners, and more likely to prioritize quality and consistency over quantity or immediacy. Desire, in this context, becomes a measured, deliberate process, rather than a constant, impulsive drive. It is also important to recognize that the dormancy of desire does not equate to a lack of pleasure or fulfillment potential. It merely requires the right conditions to be reactivated. When the body senses safety, trust, and consistent emotional presence, the dormant systems that regulate sexual arousal and erotic responsiveness can reawaken quickly and intensely, sometimes even more sensitively than before. This is why women who have experienced long periods without intimacy may appear cautious or reserved initially. But when genuine connection is established, their responsiveness can be profound, deep, and emotionally charged. Additionally, the dormancy of desire often redirects energy toward personal growth, creativity, self-care, and other productive pursuits, demonstrating the body's capacity to adapt its motivational priorities when certain needs are unmet. This internal shift is not a loss but a recalibration, showing resilience, intelligence, and self-preservation. From a psychological standpoint, the dormancy of desire also aligns with how attachment systems work in humans. Women unconsciously modulate their responsiveness to protect themselves from emotional overinvestment or disappointment, which is why emotional intimacy often precedes sexual desire in women. In effect, desire becomes conditional not on lack or deficit, but on environmental cues that signal safety, respect, and mutual investment. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it reframes long periods without intimacy not as damage or deficiency, but as a natural, adaptive response of the body to protect emotional and physical energy. Desire is not lost. It is on hold, waiting for conditions where it can flourish safely. In this way, the body demonstrates both intelligence and foresight, conserving erotic and emotional energy for moments when connection can be reciprocated, trusted, and deeply felt. This strategic dormancy ensures that when intimacy does return, it is experienced with full depth, heightened responsiveness, and renewed emotional richness, illustrating the remarkable adaptability of the female body and nervous system to prolonged periods without connection, while maintaining the potential for profound desire. Touch deprivation and emotional self-containment. Touch is one of the most fundamental forms of human communication and regulation. Yet it is often underestimated in its biological and psychological significance, especially for women. When a woman experiences a long period without intimacy, the absence of physical touch, whether it is affectionate, nurturing, or sexual, creates a subtle but profound recalibration in the nervous system. Skin-to-skin contact, gentle caresses, hugs, and even close proximity are not merely pleasurable. They serve as regulatory inputs that reduce stress hormones like cortisol, increase oxytocin levels, and signal to the body that the environment is safe and supportive. Without these inputs, the body begins to adapt by relying more heavily on internal mechanisms for emotional regulation. The nervous system shifts into a mode where self-soothing becomes the primary strategy for maintaining balance, emotional stability, and stress resilience. Over time, this adaptation fosters a form of emotional self-containment. She learns to calm herself, regulate her mood, and process stress without depending on external touch or validation. While this can appear as strength and independence, it is also a protective mechanism. The body recognizes that in the absence of consistent touch and intimacy, relying on others for emotional regulation can be risky and energetically inefficient. This process also affects the way she interacts with others. She may become less physically expressive, more guarded in gestures of affection, and slower to respond to touch or closeness. Her boundaries become more pronounced, and she may unconsciously maintain a safe emotional distance in her relationships. This is not a sign of coldness or inability to love. Rather, it is a subtle reorganization of her emotional energy to prioritize safety and predictability. Interestingly, the body compensates for this lack of external regulation by enhancing internal resources. Women often develop heightened self-awareness, stronger coping mechanisms, and a greater ability to manage their emotional states independently. These adaptations allow her to remain functional, focused, and resilient, even in the prolonged absence of physical intimacy. Additionally, touch deprivation has nuanced effects on the body's overall sensory experience. The lack of tactile feedback can reduce sensitivity to minor social or romantic stimuli, meaning that the woman may not respond to attention or affection in the same way she might have when intimacy was regular. This shift is not permanent. The sensory pathways remain intact and capable of reactivation, but the baseline responsiveness adjusts to reflect the new environment. In essence, the body becomes selective, conserving energy for moments when touch and intimacy are meaningful, safe, and rewarding. The psychological impact mirrors the physiological one. Self-reliance, measured vulnerability, and cautious engagement become central to her approach to relationships. Emotional self-containment, combined with the recalibrated sensitivity to touch, ensures that when intimacy does eventually return, it is experienced fully and with heightened awareness. The body, having learned to regulate itself independently, can now respond with clarity, presence, and deeper appreciation for connection. This adaptive capacity demonstrates the remarkable intelligence of the female nervous system. Even without external cues of affection, it maintains balance, protects emotional resources, and preserves the potential for deep relational and physical connection. Touch deprivation, then, is not a deficit. It is an opportunity for the body to develop resilience, internal regulation, and emotional sophistication while waiting for safe, meaningful intimacy to re-enter her life. What happens when intimacy returns? After a long period without intimacy, when genuine connection and closeness finally return, the female body and nervous system do not simply pick up where they left off. Instead, they undergo a profound recalibration that can feel intense, surprising, and even overwhelming. For months or years, her hormonal, neurological, and emotional systems have adapted to a state of self-containment, heightened vigilance, and selective responsiveness, which means that when safety, trust, and consistent emotional presence are reintroduced, the body responds with a surge of chemical and neurological activity that can be startling both to her and to those around her. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, floods the system, reinforcing feelings of trust, attachment, and emotional closeness in ways that may feel more intense than ever before. Dopamine circuits, which have been more focused on achievement and self-regulation during the period of intimacy absence, suddenly reactivate toward relational reward, amplifying pleasure, motivation, and emotional responsiveness in interactions with the partner. This is why women who have been without intimacy for an extended time may appear to fall in fast emotionally or become intensely attuned to their partner's behavior. It is not desperation or impulsivity, but a biological response to long-deprived bonding signals. Emotionally, she may experience heightened sensitivity, increased empathy, and stronger attachment responses. Situations that previously might have felt manageable now carry emotional weight, and subtle cues of attention, affection, and care can trigger deep feelings of trust, joy, or vulnerability. This can also make her feel unusually exposed or unguarded at first, as her body is relearning what it is like to rely on someone else for emotional regulation, comfort, and closeness. Psychologically, this period is a time of recalibration. She must integrate the return of intimacy with the independence and resilience she developed during the period of self-containment. She may oscillate between embracing closeness and retreating into guarded self-reliance, as her nervous system balances excitement with caution. Physical responsiveness is also affected. Dormant sexual and sensory pathways that have been waiting for safe, meaningful intimacy can reactivate quickly, sometimes with heightened intensity, which can surprise both partners. The key factor in this transition is consistency and predictability. The body needs repeated experiences of safety and respect to reinforce the recalibrated openness and to prevent a return to guarded self-containment. Without these, even small inconsistencies can trigger withdrawal or emotional distancing, reflecting the nervous system's protective memory of past deprivation. Importantly, The return of intimacy is not simply a restoration of desire or connection. It is an opportunity for the female body to experience relational and physical engagement with full awareness and appreciation. Every touch, every emotional exchange, every shared moment is filtered through a system that has learned both independence and the value of meaningful connection, creating a depth of experience that is rare, deliberate, and profoundly rewarding. The body's responsiveness, once dormant, can now operate with clarity, intentionality, and emotional richness, demonstrating that periods without intimacy do not diminish her capacity to love, bond, or desire, but rather prepare her to engage in a more conscious, resilient, and deeply felt way. In this sense, the return of intimacy is both restorative and transformative. It reactivates biological systems designed for connection, reinforces trust, and allows the nervous system to integrate new experiences with the lessons learned during isolation. It is a reminder that the female body is adaptive, intelligent, and capable of experiencing profound emotional and physical connection even after long stretches without it, proving that intimacy is never truly lost, but only awaiting the right conditions to flourish once again. Long-term psychological and emotional impacts of intimacy absence. Beyond hormones, nervous system adjustments, and dormant desire, long periods without intimacy create nuanced, long-term psychological and emotional effects that shape how a woman experiences herself, relationships, and the world around her. These changes are rarely dramatic or immediately visible, but they operate quietly, influencing behavior, choices, and patterns of trust over time. One of the most significant shifts is in emotional resilience. Women who have experienced extended absence of intimacy often develop heightened independence and a profound sense of self-reliance. Because the body and mind have learned not to rely on others for emotional regulation, they compensate by strengthening internal coping mechanisms. She may become remarkably adept at handling stress, processing emotions, and solving problems without external support. On the surface, this can appear as strength, confidence, and composure. Yet beneath that, there is a subtle recalibration of attachment strategies. She approaches new relationships with greater caution, assessing emotional safety before investing deeply. This caution is not resistance. It is protective intelligence, a strategy learned over time to prevent repeated disappointment or vulnerability without sufficient reciprocity. Another psychological adaptation involves emotional prioritization. Women often redirect energy that would have gone into bonding and intimacy into personal growth, creativity, and productivity. Career, hobbies, friendships, and self-improvement may take precedence, reflecting a deliberate reallocation of emotional resources. While this can produce extraordinary self-sufficiency and achievement, it also creates an internal tension. The natural human desire for connection remains present, even if it is muted or dormant, and the mind constantly balances the pull of independence with the longing for closeness. Over long periods, this can lead to heightened sensitivity to relational cues. When intimacy does return, as discussed in previous sections, her responses may be intense, sudden, or overwhelming, because the nervous system has been in protective dormancy and is now re-engaging with stimuli it has been deprived of. Psychologically, this can feel disorienting. Emotions may feel amplified, attachment may form quickly, and boundaries may need recalibration to accommodate the new experience of consistent connection. Additionally, extended absence of intimacy often reshapes social perception and relational expectations. Women may become more selective in choosing partners, more attuned to subtle inconsistencies in behavior, and more skeptical of attention that feels fleeting or unreliable. This is not cynicism. It is a learned discernment, a way for the mind and body to filter interactions to conserve energy for relationships that are emotionally safe and fulfilling. Another long-term effect is a recalibration of self-esteem and identity. In the absence of relational feedback, a woman may define her worth internally rather than relying on external validation, which can produce a strong, autonomous sense of self. Yet this autonomy exists alongside latent desire and the capacity for vulnerability, creating a paradoxical combination. She is both resilient and deeply sensitive, independent yet capable of profound attachment when conditions feel secure. Finally, prolonged absence of intimacy also influences mental frameworks around trust, emotional openness, and vulnerability. Experiences of consistent or inconsistent connection leave lasting imprints on how a woman perceives safety in relationships. The longer the absence, the more deliberate and cautious her engagement becomes, reflecting the body and mind's strategy to protect itself while remaining capable of connection. These psychological adaptations illustrate that a woman's response to extended intimacy gaps is not damage or deficiency, but a sophisticated, protective, and adaptive system designed to balance survival, emotional regulation, and eventual reconnection. Her nervous system and mind are continuously preparing for opportunities where intimacy can be experienced safely, deeply, and meaningfully, ensuring that when connection does return, it is integrated with full awareness, presence, and resilience. In essence, long-term absence of intimacy does not erase desire, emotion, or relational capacity. It refines, strengthens, and prioritizes it, creating a woman who is emotionally intelligent, cautious yet capable of deep love, and profoundly attuned to the nuances of safety, trust, and connection. The female body does not forget connection. A woman's body does not forget intimacy. It remembers, it adapts when it must, and it reopens when it is safe. Long periods without intimacy do not damage a woman. They make her selective. And when connection returns with respect, predictability, and emotional presence, the body responds naturally. Because intimacy is not about frequency, it is about safety.